Fear has a way of whispering lies into our hearts. It tells you that you're not strong enough, that the road ahead is too uncertain, and that the obstacles in front of you are bigger than the strength within you. Fear tries to convince you that the future is something to run from instead of something to walk into with faith. But when God is the one leading your life, fear loses its authority. You see, fear grows in places where trust is missing. When we try to control everything ourselves, fear begins to multiply. We worry about tomorrow, we stress about what might happen, and we carry burdens that were never meant for our shoulders. But the moment you let God take the lead, something powerful happens. The weight begins to lift, the confusion begins to clear, and the fear that once felt overwhelming begins to fade away. When God leads your life, you are no longer walking alone. You are walking with the one who sees the end from the beginning. He already knows every obstacle on the road ahead. He already knows every door that needs to open and every battle that needs to be fought. And when the one who knows everything is guiding your steps, you don't have to live in fear of what's coming next. Fear often shows up when we step into unfamiliar territory. Maybe God is calling you to take a new step, to pursue a purpose you've been avoiding, or to trust Him with something you've been holding on to tightly. The reason fear shows up is because growth always requires movement. But just because something is unfamiliar doesn't mean it's unsafe when God is the one directing your path. God doesn't promise that the journey will always be easy. There will still be challenges. There will still be moments when you feel uncertain. But the difference is that when God is leading, you are not facing those challenges alone. His wisdom goes before you. His strength stands beside you. His presence walks behind you. And when the creator of the universe surrounds your life, fear has no place to stay. Many people stay stuck in fear because they want clarity before they move. They want to see the whole path before they take the first step. But faith doesn't work that way. Faith is trusting the one who is leading even when you can't see where the road is going. It is stepping forward not because you know every detail, but because you trust the one who does. When you let God lead, your perspective begins to change. The problems that once looked overwhelming begin to look manageable. The storms that once terrified you begin to look like opportunities to grow stronger. Fear loses its power because your confidence is no longer in your own ability. It is in God's guidance. There is freedom in surrender. The moment you stop trying to control everything and start trusting God to direct your life, peace begins to replace anxiety. Courage begins to replace hesitation. Courage begins to replace hesitation. And the fear that once kept you stuck begins to dissolve. So if God is calling you forward, don't let fear hold you back. Fear is loud, but it is not powerful when God is in control. The voice of fear may try to slow you down, but the voice of God always leads you toward purpose. Walk forward with confidence. Trust the direction God is giving you. Because when God leads your life, fear does not get the final word. Fear has a unique way of taking control when we believe everything depends on us. The moment we start thinking that we must manage every detail of our lives, predict every outcome, and prevent every possible problem, fear quietly begins to grow. It grows because deep down we know our limitations. We know we cannot control tomorrow, we cannot control other people, and we cannot control every situation that comes our way. Yet many people still try to carry the weight of control, and that weight slowly turns into worry, anxiety, and fear. When a person tries to control everything, their mind never rests. They constantly think about what could go wrong. They imagine problems before they even happen. They replay conversations in their minds, wondering if they said the wrong thing. They plan every step so carefully because they are afraid that one mistake will cause everything to fall apart. This is how fear builds its home in the human heart. It thrives in the belief that everything depends on our strength, our intelligence, and our ability to manage life perfectly. But the truth is that life was never meant to be controlled by us alone. Human beings were not created to carry the responsibility of the entire future on their shoulders. When we try to do that, we step into a role that was never meant for us. The more we try to control what we cannot control, the more fear tightens its grip on our thoughts and emotions. Think about how exhausting it is to live that way. Every decision becomes heavy. Every challenge feels overwhelming. Even small problems begin to feel like disasters because we believe we must solve everything ourselves. Instead of living with peace, we live with constant tension. Instead of moving forward with confidence, we hesitate, overthink, and worry. Fear grows strongest when trust is absent. When trust in God is weak, fear becomes loud. The mind begins to ask endless questions. What if this doesn't work out? What if things get worse? What if I fail? These questions create a cycle that feeds fear again and again. The more we focus on our inability to control the future, the more powerless we feel. But trusting God changes the entire atmosphere of our thinking. Trust shifts the responsibility of control from our limited hands into God's unlimited power. It does not mean we stop making wise decisions or stop putting in effort. Instead, it means we stop believing that everything depends on us. It means we recognize that God is greater than the situations we face and wiser than the plans we try to create. When a person truly trusts God, something remarkable begins to happen inside their heart. The pressure to control everything begins to fade. The mind becomes quieter. The endless what-if questions lose their power. Instead of trying to predict every possible outcome, the person begins to focus on walking faithfully in the present moment. Trust allows us to move forward even when we don't have every answer. It allows us to face uncertainty without panic. It reminds us that God sees what we cannot see and understands what we cannot understand. While we are worried about tomorrow, God is already present there, preparing the path. Fear wants us to believe that we must protect ourselves from every possible danger. It tells us that if we loosen our grip on control, everything will collapse. But that is a lie that keeps people trapped in anxiety. The truth is that peace comes when we release the illusion of control and place our confidence in God's guidance. When we trust God, we stop carrying burdens that were never ours to carry. We stop trying to force outcomes that are beyond our ability. Instead, we focus on obedience, faithfulness, and daily steps of faith. That shift changes the way we experience life. Problems still appear, but they no longer dominate our thoughts. Challenges still come, but they no longer destroy our peace. Fear loses its strength when trust becomes stronger than control. The heart begins to understand that God is capable of handling what we cannot handle. The mind begins to accept that not knowing every detail of the future is not something to fear. It becomes an opportunity to rely on God more deeply. The more we release control and strengthen our trust in God, the smaller fear becomes. Instead of living with constant worry about what might happen, we begin to live with quiet confidence that God is guiding our steps, and when that confidence grows, fear no longer has the same place in our lives that it once had. When God leads your life, you are not being guided by someone who is guessing about the future. You are being led by the one who already knows it. Human beings make decisions based on limited information. We try to plan our lives by looking at what we can see today, but our vision is always incomplete. We cannot see the hidden obstacles ahead. We cannot see the opportunities that are waiting just beyond the next turn. Because of that limitation, fear often appears whenever we face uncertainty. But when God leads, uncertainty does not have the same power over us. God sees the entire path of your life from beginning to end. What feels unpredictable to you is already known to Him. The challenges that surprise you are not surprises to Him. The doors that seem closed today are not permanent barriers in His plan. When we truly understand this, it begins to change the way we approach life. Instead of being paralyzed by the unknown, we can move forward with confidence because the one guiding us understands every detail of what lies ahead. Think about the difference between walking through a dark place alone and walking with someone who has a light and knows the path. When you walk alone in darkness, every step feels dangerous. Sesh, You hesitate because you do not know what might be in front of you. Your imagination fills the darkness with possible threats. But when someone with knowledge and light leads the way, the fear begins to fade. You still may not see the entire road, but you trust the one who does. That is what it means to allow God to guide your life. That is what it means to allow God to guide your life. It means understanding that even when you cannot see the full picture, God can. Many people become afraid because they feel like they are walking through life without direction. They wonder if they are making the right choices. They worry about whether their decisions will lead them into trouble or failure. That fear grows when we believe that everything depends on our ability to figure things out, but God's guidance removes that burden. When you seek His direction and trust His leading, you are no longer navigating life alone. You are being directed by the one whose wisdom is greater than human understanding. He sees dangers before they appear. He knows which paths lead to growth and which paths lead to harm. What looks like a delay to us may actually be protection. What feels like a closed door may actually be God redirecting us to something better. Sometimes God's guidance does not make immediate sense. There are moments when His direction leads us through situations that feel uncomfortable or difficult. In those moments, fear tries to return. It tries to convince us that something has gone wrong. But understanding that God knows the future helps us remain steady even in those moments. We can trust that He sees a purpose beyond what we currently understand. Life often presents crossroads where decisions must be made. When we rely only on our own perspective, those moments can feel overwhelming. We analyze every possibility and worry about choosing the wrong path, but when God is the one leading, those decisions become less frightening. Instead of depending only on our own wisdom, we depend on His direction. Trusting God's knowledge of the future also changes the way we view setbacks. What looks like failure today may actually be preparation for something greater tomorrow. What feels like loss may be clearing the way for a new opportunity. Because God sees what we cannot see, His plans often stretch beyond our immediate understanding. His plans often stretch beyond our immediate understanding. Fear loses its strength when we remember that the future is not random. It is not chaotic or uncontrolled. The future is known by God, and He is capable of guiding those who trust Him through every season of life. When we truly believe that, we stop trying to force our own path and begin to follow His direction with greater peace. Walking with God does not mean we will always understep. It means we trust the one who is guiding those steps. Just as a traveler trusts an experienced guide through unfamiliar territory, we place our confidence in God's wisdom. We may not know every detail of the journey, but we know the one who does. And when your confidence is placed in the one who knows tomorrow, the fear of the unknown begins to fade. The future stops looking like a threat and starts looking like a path that God is already prepared to lead you through. Faith often requires movement before certainty. Many people believe they must understand every detail of the path ahead before they take the first step. They want complete clarity. They want guarantees that everything will work out exactly as they hope. But life rarely offers that kind of certainty. If we wait until every question is answered and every risk is removed, we may never move forward at all. Faith begins where complete understanding ends. The human mind naturally searches for security. It wants to see the entire road before beginning the journey. It wants assurance that every step will be safe and that every effort will succeed. But faith calls us to trust beyond what our eyes can see. It asks us to move forward based not on visible proof, but on confidence in God's guidance. This is often where fear tries to step in. Fear whispers that moving forward without full clarity is dangerous. It tells us that we should stay where we are until we feel completely certain about the outcome. That voice of fear can be very persuasive. It makes hesitation seem wise and inaction seem safe. But staying in one place out of fear can quietly prevent us from stepping into the purpose God has prepared for us Growth rarely happens in places of complete comfort. Every meaningful step in life usually involves some level of uncertainty. When someone begins a new opportunity, enters a new season, or responds to a calling placed on their heart, there will almost always be unanswered questions. Faith does not ignore those questions, but it refuses to allow them to become barriers that stop progress. Taking a step of faith means trusting that God is already present in the future we are walking toward. Even though we cannot see the outcome, we believe that He is guiding the process. Each step becomes an act of trust. Each decision becomes a declaration that we believe God is leading us, even when the road ahead is not fully visible. Many people imagine faith as a dramatic leap, but often it is simply a series of small steps. It might be the courage to try something new, the willingness to follow a conviction in your heart, or the decision to move forward despite uncertainty. These steps may seem small at first, but they open the door to growth and transformation. Fear tries to convince us that the unknown is something to avoid. It highlights every possible problem and magnifies every potential risk. It paints a picture of failure before we even begin. But faith looks at the same unknown and chooses to trust God instead of fear. It acknowledges the uncertainty but believes that God's guidance is greater than any risk we may face. When people refuse to move until they have full clarity, they often remain stuck in the same place for years. Opportunities pass by, potential remains unrealized, and dreams slowly fade because fear disguised itself as caution. But those who learn to walk by faith discover something powerful. As they move forward, clarity often begins to appear along the way. It is interesting how the path becomes clearer only after the first step is taken. The direction that once seemed confusing begins to make sense. The strength that once seemed insufficient begins to grow. What felt impossible at the beginning starts to feel achievable as progress continues. Faith also reshapes the way we view mistakes and challenges. When we trust that God is guiding our journey, we understand that even setbacks can become lessons that strengthen us. Instead of seeing every difficulty as proof that we should stop, we see it as part of the process of growth. Walking by faith means accepting that we will not always have perfect information. It means releasing the demand to control every detail and choosing instead to rely on God's wisdom. The more we practice this kind of trust, the stronger our faith becomes. Each step builds confidence for the next one. Over time, the fear that once tried to hold us back begins to lose its influence. We learn that progress is possible even when certainty is incomplete. We discover that courage grows through action, not through waiting. And we begin to realize that the journey of faith is not about seeing the entire path at once, but about trusting God enough to take the next step. Fear loses its power when God's presence surrounds your life. Many people try to face life's challenges relying solely on their own strength, their own wisdom, and their own understanding. When we do this, fear finds a place to grow. Every uncertainty becomes magnified, every risk feels larger than it really is, and every obstacle seems impossible to overcome. But God's presence changes the entire environment of our hearts and minds. When we acknowledge that God is with us, we are no longer facing life alone, and fear begins to lose its grip. God's presence is not distant or abstract. It is personal and active. It is the awareness that we are never walking alone, that there is a constant guide beside us, ready to help strengthen and direct us. When we sense God's nearness, we no longer have to carry the weight of life's burdens on our own. The moment we understand that He is present, fear begins to shrink because we are reminded that ultimate control rests in His hands, not ours. One of the ways God's presence overcomes fear is through His wisdom. When God is leading, we have access to divine insight that surpasses human understanding. Situations that feel confusing or overwhelming to us are clear in His perspective. Decisions that seem impossible to make on our own are guided by His knowledge. When we trust that God is with us, we begin to see life through a lens of wisdom rather than worry, and that shifts our focus away from fear. God's strength also stands beside us in every trial. Life is full of challenges that can leave us feeling inadequate or vulnerable. Fear tries to convince us that we are alone in facing these struggles, that we lack the ability to overcome, and that the difficulty will break us. But when God's strength is present, our weaknesses are covered, we realize that we do not have to rely solely on ourselves because His power works through us. When we lean on Him, fear no longer has the same authority over our hearts. Another important aspect of God's presence is His guidance. Many fears arise from uncertainty, fear of the unknown, fear of making the wrong choice, fear of what the future holds. But when God is present, He provides direction. He leads us step by step, helping us navigate obstacles, avoid pitfalls, and move toward the purposes He has for our lives. The guidance of God replaces hesitation with confidence. When we follow His lead, the unknown becomes less intimidating because we trust that He is already ahead of us. God's presence also provides comfort in times of stress or sorrow. Fear often grows in moments of loneliness, pain, or confusion. We imagine the worst possible outcomes and convince ourselves that we are powerless to change them. But when we feel God's nearness, His peace floods our hearts. That peace does not come from solving every problem, but from the assurance that He is with us even in the storms. When His comfort surrounds us, fear loses its foothold. Living with God's presence also transforms the way we see challenges. Obstacles that once seemed insurmountable begin to appear as opportunities for growth. Problems that once paralyzed us now become stepping stones for learning, development, and deeper reliance on God. Fear no longer dominates our perspective because we understand that God is not only present but active, working in and through every situation for our good. Finally, God's presence reminds us of His faithfulness. Fear thrives on doubt and uncertainty, on imagining that things may go wrong or that God may not act. But when we recognize that God is with us, that He has never failed and never will fail, our confidence grows. We begin to rely less on our own understanding and more on the one whose promises are unchanging. The awareness of His presence reinforces trust, and trust is the antidote to fear. When we allow ourselves to dwell in God's presence, our hearts shift from anxiety to courage. Our minds shift from worry to wisdom. Our steps shift from hesitation to boldness. Fear may still knock at the door, but it no longer controls the household of our hearts. The closer we walk with God, the less room fear has to grow, because His presence overshadows every doubt, every worry, and every uncertainty. The reality of God walking beside us transforms fear into confidence, uncertainty into clarity, and weakness into strength. Surrendering control to God is one of the most challenging yet most liberating steps a person can take. Many people hold on tightly to their plans, their ideas, and their expectations because they fear what might happen if they let go. They believe that if they loosen their grip, the future will become unpredictable and the consequences could be disastrous. This desire for control is natural, but it also keeps fear alive. Fear thrives in the illusion that we must manage every detail, that everything depends on our ability to handle life perfectly. The more we cling to control, the more anxious we become and the more anxious we feel. Surrendering control is not about weakness. It is about understanding that God's power and wisdom are far greater than our own. When a person chooses to surrender control, they begin to release the burdens that weigh them down. Life stops feeling like a constant struggle against circumstances, and it begins to feel like a journey guided by a loving and all-knowing hand. Fear loses its grip because it no longer has the foundation it needs. Fear thrives on the belief that we are alone, that our choices alone determine the outcome, and that we must protect ourselves from every possible threat. When control is surrendered to God, we realize that we are never truly alone and that the outcome is not dependent on our limited understanding. Many people resist surrender because it seems intuitive. They think, if I let go, I will be vulnerable, I will be unprepared, I will be unprepared, I will be at risk. But surrendering to God does not mean abandoning responsibility or ignoring wisdom. It means aligning our will with His, acknowledging that His plan is perfect even when we do not understand it, and trusting that His timing is better than ours. It is an act of faith that transforms the way we approach challenges, decisions, and opportunities. When we surrender control, peace begins to replace anxiety. When we surrender control, peace begins to replace anxiety. The constant pressure to predict the future, to anticipate every obstacle, and to ensure every outcome becomes less important. We start to live with the confidence that God is capable of handling what we cannot handle. This confidence shifts our focus from fear to faith. Instead of obsessing over problems, we focus on obedience, prayer, and trusting the guidance we receive. Each step forward becomes an act of reliance on God, not a test of our own strength. Courage also begins to replace hesitation. Courage also begins to replace hesitation. When fear controls our decisions, we often hold back from pursuing opportunities or taking the steps we know we are called to take. We procrastinate, overanalyze, and delay action because we are afraid of making mistakes. But when control is surrendered, courage emerges naturally. Courage does not mean the absence of fear. It means acting despite fear because we trust that God is leading us. It is the understanding that fear may be present, but it is no longer the authority over our choices or our actions. Surrendering control also reshapes our perception of challenges. Obstacles that once seemed insurmountable begin to appear manageable because we are no longer carrying the full weight of the burden. Life's difficulties do not disappear, but they take on a new perspective. We begin to see challenges as opportunities to grow stronger, to rely more deeply on God, and to learn lessons that we could not have learned on our own. Fear loses its power because it cannot thrive works. In trust, peace, and courage are present. Faith grows as surrender deepens. Faith grows as surrender deepens. The more we practice releasing control to God, the more we see His faithfulness in every area of our lives. Every situation in which we trust God's leading, even when it feels uncomfortable or uncertain, strengthens our confidence in Him. This trust is built over time, step by step, as we witness the outcomes that confirm His guidance. Faith and surrender work hand in hand. The more we surrender, the more faith grows. The more faith grows, the more faith grows, the easier it becomes to surrender again. Many people discover that surrendering control brings freedom they never expected. The freedom to live without constant worry, the freedom to move forward without the hesitation, and the freedom to enjoy the present moment without being consumed by what might happen next. Fear no longer has a place to dominate our thoughts because the foundation of control has been removed. We are free to trust, to act, and to live with confidence in God's direction. Ultimately, surrendering control is a daily practice. Life will continue to present moments where fear tempts us to take back control, to try to manage every detail ourselves. But each time we choose to surrender, each time we consciously hand over our anxieties and plans to God, fear diminishes further. The more we embrace surrender, the more we experience the peace, courage, and freedom that come from trusting God completely. It is in this surrender that fear truly loses its power and life begins to unfold according to God's perfect plan. Walking forward with confidence is not always easy. Many people hesitate to take steps toward the future because fear has convinced them that they are not ready, that the obstacles are too great, or that failure is inevitable. The human heart often struggles with doubt, anxiety, and hesitation. We look at the challenges ahead and overwhelmed, thinking that we must be flawless, perfectly prepared, or in complete control before we can move. But when we place our trust in God, confidence begins to grow and fear loses its power. Confidence in God is not arrogance or self-assurance. It is the quiet certainty that comes from knowing we are being led by one who is greater, wiser, and stronger than we are. Confidence begins in the heart. Confidence begins in the heart. It grows when we remind ourselves that our steps are not guided by chance or by our own limited understanding, but by God's divine wisdom. Many people look at uncertainty as a threat, but when God leads, uncertainty becomes an opportunity to rely on His guidance. Confidence is the ability to step forward even when the path is not fully clear, trusting that God already knows the way. It is knowing that we do not have to have every detail figured out before moving. When God leads, we can take the next step, knowing that He is already working ahead of us, preparing the path, in shaping the outcomes for our good. Walking with confidence also requires a shift in perspective. Fear focuses on obstacles, setbacks, and the possibility of failure. Confidence focuses on God's presence, His promises, and His ability to see the end from the beginning. When we dwell on God's faithfulness rather than our own limitations, courage begins to replace hesitation. The mind no longer magnifies every potential problem, but instead looks for the guidance and strength that comes from trusting God. This change in focus is not automatic. It is cultivated through prayer, reflection, and choosing to align our thoughts with God's truth rather than the lies that fear whispers. One of the greatest sources of confidence comes from understanding God's power and character. When we remember that God is unchanging, all-knowing, and perfectly good, we can move forward without being paralyzed by doubt. We recognize that our steps are not subject to random chance, but are directed by a loving and capable God. Confidence is rooted in this awareness and the understanding that God is fully capable of handling any situation we face, and that He is actively guiding our journey even when we cannot see the full picture. Confidence grows as we take action, even imperfect action. Many people believe that confidence comes only after we have everything perfectly in place. In reality, confidence is strengthened through obedience. The more we move forward in faith, even when uncertain, the more we experience God's guidance and provision. Each step forward is proof that God is faithful. Each decision made in trust builds evidence that He is leading and protecting us. Why? Confidence is cultivated through the repeated experience of seeing God's hand at work, even in circumstances that once seemed intimidating. Walking forward with confidence also involves releasing the need to control outcomes. Fear thrives on the belief that we must manage every detail and protect ourselves from every possible problem. Confidence, on the other hand, trusts that God is in control and that His plans are perfect. This trust does not mean we are passive. It means we act faithfully while resting in the assurance that God will handle what is beyond our control. When we release the illusion of total control, fear diminishes and a sense of peace and courage takes its place. Another key element of confidence is persistence. Walking with confidence does not guarantee a path without challenges. Life will present obstacles, setbacks, and moments of uncertainty. But confidence in God keeps us moving forward even when the journey is difficult. Each step of obedience, each act of faith reinforces the truth that God is leading us. Confidence is strengthened not by the absence of difficulty, but by the assurance of God's presence through every difficulty. Confidence also inspires boldness in decision-making. When fear controls our lives, we hesitate, second-guess ourselves, and miss opportunities. But when God's guidance is trusted, boldness grows. We begin to take steps that align with purpose, knowing that even if challenges arise, God will provide the wisdom, strength, and courage needed to navigate them. This boldness is not reckless. It is rooted in faith and understanding that God is with us. As confidence in God grows, fear loses its power more and more. Hesitation gives way to courage. Doubt gives way to trust. And anxiety gives way to peace. Each step forward, guided by faith, strengthens the heart and mind against fear. The act of moving forward itself becomes a testimony to God's faithfulness, a reminder that fear does not have the final word when God leads. The more we walk in this confidence, the more natural it becomes to trust God with the next step, the next challenge, and the next season of life. Confidence is not a fleeting feeling, but a steady assurance grounded in the knowledge that when God leads, fear truly disappears. The voice of fear can be loud, persistent, and convincing, but it is not stronger than the voice of God. Many people allow fear to dictate their actions because they listen to it more than they listen to God. Fear speaks of limitation, danger, failure, and loss. It emphasizes what could go wrong and magnifies every risk. It thrives in the absence of trust and feeds on doubt. But the voice of God speaks a completely different message. It speaks of hope, courage, provision, and purpose. When we learn to recognize and respond to God's voice above fear, our perspective shifts and fear loses its ability to control us. Listening to God requires intentionality. In a world full of distractions, the whispers of fear often become louder than the guidance of God. The mind becomes preoccupied with what-if scenarios, with worst-case possibilities, and with the voices of others who may also be doubtful or skeptical. This is why it is so important to train the heart to hear God clearly. The voice of God is consistent, reassuring, and rooted in truth. It does not panic, it does not exaggerate, and it does not manipulate. It speaks with authority, wisdom, and love. Learning to recognize this voice takes practice, but it is a skill that transforms how we respond to challenges and uncertainties. When we choose to follow God's voice rather than fear, our decisions are no longer driven by anxiety or hesitation. Fear wants to stop us before we even begin. It cautions against change, discourages risk, and convinces us that remaining in the familiar is safer than stepping forward. The voice of God, however, invites us to step into our calling, to move toward purpose, and to trust that He will equip us for every step. This is why so many people experience breakthroughs when they stop listening to fear and start listening to God. They realize that the limitations they imagined were not reality, and the obstacles they feared were not insurmountable. Fear often thrives on exaggeration. It takes small challenges and inflates them into mountains, making problems appear bigger than they truly are. It emphasizes worst-case scenarios and creates paralysis, but the voice of God provides perspective. It helps us see difficulties for what they really are, not as unmovable barriers, but as opportunities to grow, learn, and deepen our reliance on Him. When we tune in to God's guidance, we are able to assess situations with clarity rather than with panic, and this clarity weakens the power of fear. Responding T. Oh, God's voice requires trust. Trust that God knows the end from the beginning. Trust that His plans are good, even when they include challenges we cannot yet understand. Trust that His strength will be made perfect in our weakness. When trust is present, fear cannot dominate our hearts. Fear is loudest when trust is absent, when the mind believes it must figure everything out alone. But when we allow God's voice to lead us, we acknowledge that we are not alone, that we are being guided by one whose wisdom surpasses our own, and that the future is already in capable hands. Another way to distinguish God's voice from fear is by the peace it brings. Fear agitates, stresses, and unsettles the heart. God's voice brings calm assurance even in the midst of uncertainty. It reassures us that challenges are not permanent and that every step taken in obedience is aligned with a greater purpose. That peace is a marker that God is leading, and when we focus on that peace rather than the noise of fear, we gain courage and confidence to move forward. The voice of God also reminds us of our identity and purpose. Fear often attacks our sense of worth, telling us that we are incapable, unworthy, or unprepared. God's voice reminds us that we are His, that we are equipped for the tasks He places before us, and that our purpose is secure in Him. When we internalize this truth, fear loses its authority because it cannot undermine what God has already established. The faith grows as we consistently choose God's voice over fear. Each decision made in obedience, each step taken in trust, reinforces the understanding that God is faithful. Every time we act despite fear, we gain confidence in his guidance, and the voice of fear grows weaker. Over time, responding to God's voice becomes second nature. Fear may still attempt to whisper, but it is drowned out by the certainty, clarity, and courage that comes from following God. The more we commit to listening to God above fear, the more our lives reflect boldness, peace, and purpose. Fear loses control because its influence is based on deception and doubt. God's voice is truth, and truth has power over every lie that fear tries to tell. Choosing to heed God's guidance, even when it contradicts our natural fears, becomes a practice of faith, and with each practice, fear diminishes. In this way, listening to God is not just about guidance, it is about freedom, courage, and the realization that when God leads, fear truly does not have the final word.